Welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Braxton Hunter, and along with me today is my friend Joshua Ryan Farris. He was on the show maybe about 2 or 3 years ago to talk about the soul, but today we're going to put him up against some, hopefully, some challenging opponents, and we can dig down on these things. But there are also some people I think we're going to call in who just maybe really admire Joshua and would like to get his thoughts on something, and so we're going to have a good time today. But we're going to begin. All of his information is in the description for this video, links to everything there, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that, because this is a very well credentialed person speaking on the show today, particularly on this subject, and you need to go read his bio. And we'll also, yeah, she's right. I need to pin the link, chat person. So I need to pin the link to call in the description. But I'm so glad to have Joshua here. And we're going to start just by very quickly letting him make some very brief, a few minutes, opening statements, sort of. And then after that, if we have a caller, we'll go to our first caller. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Joshua. Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, thanks, Braxton. Good to be with you again. Yeah, it has been like 2.5 years or so since we last chatted. So looking forward to this. This will be fun. I've not done this before, so I'm sure we're going to get questions of all sorts across the spectrum. But just to kind of motivate our thinking a little bit right now, when I think about the soul, I think about the soul as some kind of thing, a thing that is closely related to consciousness, first-person perspective. You can think of the movies. This has been in the films. This has kind of been a question in the background of lots of different films as of late in recent history. Certainly, if we're all familiar with The Matrix, if you haven't seen The Matrix, well, you need to see The Matrix. It's like one of the most important sci-fi films ever, arguably. But in The Matrix, of course, you see this scenario where people are kind of plugged into the back of their head, and they are able to somehow log in, or at least their consciousness is able to log into this virtual universe, something like what we have on the internet already. And that kind of is suggestive, arguably, that something else is going on other than our body. We're able to actually access a different kind of space altogether from our bodies, distinct from our bodies. Of course, there's been the San Juniper on Black Mirror. There's this fun show of actually asking the question of whether or not we could upload our consciousness, say maybe to the cloud or something of the sort. So these are certainly questions that are in kind of social consciousness right now. These are questions that are being asked. And if you've seen the fun little animated film, it's a fun film about a little girl who's exploring her internal life. It's called Inside Out. Great film for kids. I think it was clean. I think it was a good film. I watched it with my daughter, and it kind of explores this theme of the internal life itself. What's going on, our emotional states, our thoughts and experiences and the like. And so all of these films kind of motivate us to ask the question, is there something else about us other than our bodies? And I think if we're honest, upon reflection, we will believe that there is something beyond our bodies, something that we call, or tradition, Christian tradition is called a soul itself. So the issue at the end of the day, I think this is important to say, is not about soul versus science. Although I think some still would frame it in that way. It's rather more about its reduction versus reality. Albert Camus, the famous existentialist, said something along these lines. Man is the only creature that refuses to be what he is. And Chesterton, when he talks about the soul, he talks about it as one of the most important things that helps us gain a glimpse into or access into the universe itself, ultimate reality. And so here's the question that I would pose to the audience and to those listeners who are maybe going to call in. Are we systems or subjects? Are we systems or subjects? Science describes something like systems, structures, functions, but it doesn't describe the subject. It doesn't get at first-person perspective or first-person experience. The soul is something, you might say, that refers to this thing, the kind of thing that I am, that you are, Braxton, arguably. I don't have access to your mind, but I assume you have a soul, or you are a soul, I should say. You are a soul. You have an irreducible subjectivity and unity, or even agency. You have the ability to make choices and deliberate about your choices based upon your own internal states that you have access to, that you are conscious of and can deliberate about based upon reasons themselves. And so all of this is suggestive of the fact that we are subjects. Subjectivity is at stake. Science doesn't really give us subjectivity. The material is not sufficient for explaining subjectivity. So arguably, we need something like a soul. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Joshua. And we already have people backstage ready to come on. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the first person that we have. I actually reached out to him and said, hey, we're going to be doing this. This is James Fodor. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, Braxton. Good to talk to you again. Thanks
James
for
and I have
having me.
interacted indirectly through making videos back and forth in the past, and I find him to be a really sharp guy. I think you have a master's degree, or is it now a doctorate in philosophy?
Yeah, not in philosophy. My PhD is in cognitive neuroscience, actually. I just finished last year.
Excellent. All right. Well, James, I'll just put you front and center, and feel free to question away.
Sure. Hi, Josh. Thanks for having me on. So, big topic here. Obviously, only we'll be able to scratch the surface in a little bit of time. But I guess what I wanted to ask about is how you see the relationship between the soul and the body, or like the brain specifically. But one of the things that I try to understand about like substance dualists is that they talk about the soul as being like kind of the mind or consciousness or something like that. And that then raises the question, though, as to what role the brain might play in those things. Presumably, we think the brain has at least some role to play in like generating or affecting mental states. And so, I wonder things like, if the soul is our mind by itself, then it sort of raises the question of what the brain is doing. But then if the brain is generating the mind, at least in part, then like, how does the soul interact with the brain? What's the connection or the overlap that you see there?
Yeah, well, at some level, so everything that we observe, our thoughts, our personality, our memory, our decision making, certainly has some kind of correlate with brain states. I think that's clear enough. We can say that there are correlates, and we can derive all sorts of information about our neurochemistry and the like, our bodily states from brain mapping and neurophysiological studies that are done as we amass more and more and more information. Certainly, there's much that we can say about that. And at a minimum, I think we could say, we would all say, and dualists would certainly say, that there is a correlation between the brain and whatever it is that we're talking about when we're talking about the person. The person and the brain are at least correlatively related. There is some sort of, at a base, at a very minimum, some kind of singular basic relationship between the two. And that provides an account for the interaction between the two types of things in question, if we're assuming that neurons or the brain itself is a distinct kind of thing. If we're making that assumption, then there would be some kind of singular basic relation that accounts for the interaction between the two. So at a minimum, we have some kind of interaction, and we can say all sorts of things about the brain itself. Now, whether or not that translates directly or not into what we say about the mind or personhood, I think that's a further question, a deeper question. It's not altogether entirely clear that we can make certainly direct inferences from the brain to the mind or to the person itself, because there is something irreducible certainly about the mind or personhood itself. But we can posit that based upon our experiences, and I think rooted in a kind of first-person experience of the body being known immediately, not immediately or indirectly, at least it's known. We can make inferences, certainly, that there are correlations between the two, and we can set up brain maps and develop and amass all sorts of information about the fact that we can infer maybe even certain experiences based upon brain maps, and we can say certain things maybe about the person, about traits that they have, about maybe overwhelming experiences that they have, or we can say certain things like that. But beyond that, can we make a direct kind of connection to between the two? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there is something about the nature of personhood that defies that kind of reductive explanation, such that it's not available or accessible by directly scanning a brain map. The brain map itself, right, is a representation of something else going on.
Well, I guess that's sort of what I'm asking about. Maybe I'll give a specific example to sort of ground this. I know we have other people on the line, but just to clarify the point. So you were talking before about like who we are fundamentally, and you mentioned like Braxton is a soul, right? I think there's many things that go into making us like who we are or what we are fundamentally. I would think that our memories is at least a very important component of that. But it seems that we have very strong evidence that memories are encoded in the physical brain. For example, we know the hippocampus is a critical structure which is involved in the process of storing and consolidating long-term memories, and that if that's damaged, as has happened in various patients, then people lose the ability to form those memories, or other types of damage can cause people to forget memories that they've so far formed. So it seems that at the very least, there's a causal connection between what happens to the brain and what happens to our memories. So this raises a question to me, is like, it seems like our memories are at least in part stored in and by the brain, but does that mean that our memories are like not stored in the soul if the soul by itself doesn't have memories? Or or do you think that they work together to store memories? How do you think about that? Just taking this as an example of one cognitive function.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is certainly a deep interactive relationship between the two. If we're taking them both to be substances, there's a deep interactive relationship between the mind and the body, or the mind and the brain, and that interaction can create, you might say, these structures that are latent within the brain, as the brain can have some kind of memory. I don't think it's memory in the literal sense, but it is a kind of bodily memory that we talk about. I mean, in martial arts, I talk about like how when I practice a move well enough, my body seems to just move that way more naturally, right? I just do it enough, right? When I practice my 8 katas in ninjutsu, it just happens, right? More naturally once I do it right, of course. It works. It just works, and my body functions properly. It moves in the way that it ought to move in order to respond.
Well, sorry to interrupt there, but there are patients who have the exact opposite of what you're talking about, like HM being the famous example. He had bilateral damage to his hippocampi, and he couldn't form new explicit memories. He could meet new people, but a few moments later, he wouldn't remember having met them. But he could form new procedural memories of the sort of bodily fault you're talking about. Like he could learn sports or how to play the piano, things like that. So it seems like some brain structures or functions are necessary for forming the very sorts of memories that seem to be central to like who we are and what we are as people. And if that's part of the mind, then it seems to me that there is an intimate connection between things that are happening in our brain and what's happening in our mind or soul. And so I'm just interested in understanding how you think about that. I'm not actually making an argument. I'm just trying to understand what your view is.
Sure. Yeah. So I think through the interaction relationship, you develop certain structures that might have some sort of correlate in the body and require the body in some functional sense. It might require it. So the mind or consciousness in certain ways might be functionally dependent upon the integrative relationship between the body and the mind, or the brain and the mind. And so that creates certain structures in both the brain and in the mind itself. So I think it would be hard to, and you're not proving anything, right, in your argument, but I think it would be hard to demonstrate from what we do know empirically to about the nature of these different types of memory that seem to be functionally dependent on the brain, that there is no kind of necessary soul or mind that's present, that's somehow operative in the the experience of those memories themselves, or in the memories themselves. I think that would be a strong kind of entailment from the empirical data itself. But I would say, yeah, there's a lot we can say from the interaction relationship, and that interaction relationship can create structures or functional structures that occur in the brain, and functional structures that occur in the soul. So I do think souls have structure to them that are even adapted to the brain itself, or given, I guess, impressed, you might say, from the brain itself.
Oh, cool. Very interesting. Well, thanks for your thoughts. I appreciate your time.
Cheers.
Thanks,
yeah,
James.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on. And I want everyone to see this is the perfect way to be a guest. Shows up, chats a little bit, takes off on his own. Anyway, thanks, James. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
man.
Braxton. Take care.
All right. And so that's James. And now we've got Danny. Danny, by the way, smart guy. And also not too long ago was on with Jordan Peterson on one of those Surrounded Jubilee episodes. Can't be here by video, but Danny, welcome to the show. Danny. Danny may be away.
There we go. I had the wrong microphone on, but I can be heard now?
Yes.
All right, perfect.
I feel like I know Danny. Don't I know Danny? But I can't see him, so I'm not sure.
Well, we'll never know then. But maybe I think you look familiar. Right. But maybe check out my channel and you can see. But
you got a channel? What's the channel called?
Danny Philtalk.
And Danny has very limited time, so I'm
sorry. Okay, we'll get
no,
right
that's
to
okay.
it.
You're being friendly.
I was trying to be relational.
Yeah, that's fine. So actually, earlier you said that the self, I believe, is irreducible. Right. And so I'll give you sort of my perspective, and then I want to get your thoughts on it. On one hand, there might be, if there's a problem with, let's say there is a problem with reduction, in which case then some physicalists that want to reduce the self to physical stuff, brain stuff, neurological stuff, right, then they would have a problem if it's in fact the case that the self is irreducible. But I don't see, let's say, substance dualists as, I see them as being just as guilty in that, while they're not reducing the self to physical stuff, they're reducing the self to soul stuff, spirit stuff, right? And so I take that to be a kind of reduction, a reduction to the supernatural stuff rather than the natural stuff. So it seems like you are doing some kind of reduction, just not a reduction to physical stuff. So I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah, actually, Danny, that's really good. So that's a little deeper than I was anticipating. So I come from a school of thought from Richard Firmerton, who I consider to be a great epistemologist, classical foundationalist, who says that in our intuitive experience, well, we don't even have to, in our phenomenal experience, he argues in mind, mind, knowledge, and dualism. That's not exactly the title. His famous 2011 book with Cambridge. He argues for what's called a kind of epistemic dualism or phenomenal dualism, where he says that in our experiences, we necessarily begin with two types of properties, epistemic properties, namely phenomenal properties and physical properties. Now, we can know physical properties by way of in direct relation to our phenomenal experience of the physical, or by way of our phenomenal experiences of our own bodies. But our bodies are not necessarily directly accessible if there is this implicit distinction already within our experience, our phenomenal experience. So when I use the word phenomenal, I'm referring to, you might think of like what philosophers talk about as qualities or qualitative experiences. So what it is like to experience my body, or being inhabited in my body, or experiencing the world in my body. There's something about the nature of the experience of my body that is distinct from the experience of myself. So for Richard Fumerton, he says there's this necessary implicit phenomenological dualism or epistemic dualism that begins with phenomenal consciousness itself. And so within phenomenal consciousness, we can actually know and have direct access to, based on access that we have to our conscious states of awareness, that the body exists. We can know it because, well, we experience it indirectly as distinct from our phenomenal experience itself. So I think in that case, if we were to make a small step forward, Fumerton doesn't quite go this far, then we would have to say those properties have to inhere in something. They have to be in something. Unless we want to say that properties just kind of exist on their own by themselves without a thing to be attached to unify in some way. And if we want to, but if we do make that small step, then what we have there is something, it seems, like a mind or an immaterial thing or a soul, as the ancients would call it. We have something like that.
But would you call that a reduction or no?
I would say I'm inclined to call it, a reduction. But the distinction, this gets at your question more directly. The distinction is a reduction to empirical or physical things that we have indirect access to, and a reduction to the kinds of things that we have maybe direct access to in our private states of awareness.
Okay, so then your earlier statement about the self being irreducible, what you meant there is that it's not reducible to the sort of ordinary objects of experience in the natural world, right? But it is in some sense reducible, is the way I'm understanding your position.
It is reducible to, probably reducible to something like my substance, whatever my substance is that I have access to.
All right,
so you
I
might
appreciate it.
function,
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Braxton, for having me.
Oh, well, thanks, Danny, for coming on. I know you had limited time, but appreciate you being here, man.
Bye.
Bye. All right. And this gentleman, Drew, looks familiar to me. And I think, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, Drew, that the reason you think that you look familiar to me is because you are married to someone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, the sound is a little laggy, so I'm sorry if I'm
That's okay. I think you're
listen
married to
to,
someone who has an
Joshua on
active
my
Twitter.
phone,
Oh.
but then hear you on my tablet while I'm on the break. So I
Yeah,
don't know
so
what's going
you're
on with the
hearing me a
sound.
little late, but we'll see if this can work. But you have a wife, I think, who was, I don't know, was it Joel Webbin or somebody who was saying this is the husband of this woman? Was that you?
Oh yeah, he was making fun of me with my cat picture. Yeah.
Who was that? Was that Webbin or James White? Who
Yeah,
was that?
it was Joel Levin. Yeah.
Joel Webbin. All right. All right. Well, I'm glad you're here, Drew. Fire away.
Yeah. So I've entertained. I've not fully adopted or anything. I've entertained the idea of non-reductive physicalism, because I like Chris Date holds to it. Because I've looked at the study of the soul, and the first reference you see to the soul or the nefesh in the Old Testament is in regards to living beings such as animals. You see it referred to with human beings as a whole that can eat, die, be killed, destroyed, kidnapped, and it's literally using that word nefesh with the nefesh dying or being killed or being stabbed. You see it being used for pronouns. You see it being used for a life of the individual. Like in the passage it says the nefesh of the flesh is in the blood, like the life of the flesh is in the blood. So the life there is that same word nefesh. And so it's saying that basically the life or the nefesh is contingent on or reliant on the blood to function. Even dead bodies or the dead is referred to as nefesh, such as corpses, dead persons that no longer have breath in them. So just trying to get your perspective on how do you reconcile these passages that refer to animals being nefesh just as we are living nefesh. In the Genesis account, God breathed the breath of life and we became a living nefesh. a living being. So how do you reconcile like the first reference of animals being nefesh to them being able to be stabbed or killed nefesh, to corpses being nefesh? So how do you kind of conceptualize or tie those together?
Yeah, good. No, that's a good question. And it was what, Drew?
Yes.
Hey, Drew. Yeah, good to meet you. Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question. There's a lot going on there in terms of the biblical material. This is a switch from the philosophical material. There's anytime we're dealing with language, there's going to be some complexities, especially when we're going from language in the context of narrative and then trying to ascertain kind of nuanced, analytically nuanced philosophical positions. Genesis 2:7, so the man became a living soul or a living nephesh, is an important passage that's often referred to. And in the passage, especially amongst many contemporary interpreters, even Old Testament interpreters, there's going to be this, there's this line of thought that says, that what's being referenced is the whole being. Functionally,
right.
the whole being as one unified reality, not a bifurcated dualistic reality. And so this is common. This is a common but important kind of objection to the possibility of dualism and reading dualism from the scriptures or from the biblical material. So you have other texts that you're referring to, like Ecclesiastes 9:5. The dead know nothing. I mean, Psalm 146, I think, says something like his breath departs, as to suggest that he dies, right? I mean, you have the famous passage in Ecclesiastes where the soul and or the breath and the body are distinct. The breath goes back to be with the Lord, but the inference is that the body goes to the grave, something like that, right? So there's all these passages that describe this kind of nephesh, and I think that's an important line to take hermeneutically in trying to make a case for monism or materialism. Well, not necessarily materialism. You could be a monist in a different way and just say that the body is reducible to ideas and experiences, or that God himself, they're dependent upon the mind of God. But that's kind of a weird position. Let's not go there yet. But I think what we should think about with nephesh, especially in those contexts, is I think what's being emphasized is what John Cooper talks about in Soul, Body, and Life Everlasting. He makes this case that these kinds of passages are perfectly hospitable within a dualistic framework if we understand that the holism that's being referenced, or the functional holism, or the functional integrity of the unified being is made sense of by what he calls kind of holistic dualism or functional dualism, wherein what he's saying there is that, at least in the context of our own experiences of the world, we experience the world as one kind of functionally integrated, unified being of body and soul that interacts in the world. And that so in some way that we experience, our bodies are important, significant, and in a functional way integrated with the soul's operations and the soul's experience of the world. And it even provides structure to the soul. So if you understand it that way, you understand functional dualism along those lines, then I think this, even kind of on the surface, dealing with these kinds of passages, I don't think there's even really a tension with them. Now, that's not to say that we would want to take these passages and make an argument from that, by way of inference to the soul. Although many ancient interpreters did that, right? When they read Genesis 2:7, they would say, yeah, there's something dualistic about Genesis 2:7. There's a body that God kind of crafts together, and then he breathes life in it and gives it life, which they took to be the soul. If you read somebody like On the Soul and Resurrection, one of the Gregories, the great fathers. And so a lot of contemporary interpreters won't go that route. They think that's illicit or fallacious kind of hermeneutical reading of the passage. But you have some interpreters like Richard Steiner recently in his book Disembodied Souls or Disembodied Spirits, where he's making a case that actually nephesh, as it's used, he's not making a case like, that we can make an argument for the soul or for different parts of the human based upon words themselves. What he's doing is he's making a case particularly from Ezekiel, although he does look at Genesis 2:7, and he says that actually nephesh is often used as a designation for something like a soul or an immaterial substance itself. And so he makes a strong, I would argue, a very strong exegetical case that based upon the way that nephesh is used, of course, there's an elastic kind of conceptual space of kind of meaning in how that word is taken. But there are some cases contextually in Ezekiel particularly that suggest that it is referring or designating specifically something like a soul, that it can be disembodied.
Okay. So would your position be that it in of itself, the word nefesh shouldn't be necessarily narrowed to a disembodied soul? Because again, going back to the it being used of animals, like I said, there's passages that it literally is said to bleed or refly on blood. I mean, of course, like you're saying, there's passages that aren't necessarily attributing it to something particularly tangible, as far as it can refer to things that have a wide range of emotions or feelings. It can be referred to the breath of the throat. It can refer to pronouns or a life of an individual, which doesn't necessarily imply that it is something immaterially separate if it's just referring to your life in a more general sense. So how, again, what would your position really be around the word, if the word nefesh is typically what is rendered the soul in the New Testament? And I know a lot of modern translations don't even render it soul. They a lot of times render it life. Or, but so what would your position be about that particular, I guess, word in the Old Testament?
Yeah. I think again, I think it has some conceptual elasticity. So it has an elastic kind of meaning and use dependent upon the context of the passage. So I think in some ways, you're right. The word is used, nefesh is used with respect to animals and animal life. So I think that's fair enough. I think what some have said is that there are different kinds of nefesh that are being described early on in the Genesis passages, and that's perfectly acceptable. In other passages, you do have what's called a kind of a merism. There are terms that are designated that might be referencing or highlighting certain aspects or parts of the human being. Now, we wouldn't want to infer necessarily from that, strictly speaking, that there are like multiple parts necessarily, or 3+ parts in the person itself, but they're highlighting something about the person. So you might say that the throat certainly has some kind of semantic meaning that is legitimately being referenced there, that's being highlighted by nefesh, at least in the way that it's being used in that context. So I wouldn't want to go too far and say that nefesh has a strict designation to a philosophical part in every case.
Sure, but I do find it interesting that the primary uses of nefesh through the whole Old Testament are typically, honestly, more physical in nature. That's from my observation, doing a study on it and looking at how it's kind of categorized as far as, like I said, animals and creatures, a person, pronoun, life, blood, dead body, emotions, and just like something that has like the majority of relate to something that is tangible, that can be touched, that can experience. And so I find that interesting. Again,
So
I'm
I would
not,
say,
I'm
yeah,
not saying that
And we'll let we'll let
I would say two things.
Joshua
yeah.
finish off here, and then we'll move to the next caller. Thanks so much for coming on, though, Drew.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, I would say two things real quick to you. I think if even if it is being primarily
Is it
a
frozen?
designation or a reference to something that is bodily or touchable or something like that, I think that there could be
I think
even
when
within
you're
that
both
there's
in the chat,
something
I can't hear
presupposed.
Joshua.
We may be having some tech problems here, Drew. I'm so sorry for that.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you so much, though, and I'm really glad to meet you. I've seen your face a lot on Twitter because of Joel Webbin, apparently. So, so thanks so much for being on, though, Drew. And we'll move on now to the Fallen Ape Theist, a good friend of the channel. This is our atheist, closest atheist friend, maybe, to the channel. Richard, welcome to the show.
Oh, I've heard about this Richard guy.
Hey, thanks for having me. Just quick mic check. Can you hear me okay?
We can
Sort of.
hear you, although your video's jumpy. That's totally fine, but we can hear you fine.
Okay, just in case I cut out, I'm going to ask, and if I get cut, I'll just listen on YouTube. But let's say hypothetically that I was a Christian and Christianity was true. Under that scenario, I convert to a Muslim. I live my life as a sincere Muslim, and I die as a Muslim. When I convert, is my soul a Muslim, or does my soul know better?
Is that a cheeky question? Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no, he's being funny, right?
I'm not sure if you're being funny or not, Richard.
No, I'm serious. I'm wondering if my soul is like, I know this isn't right, but this is what he believes, so he's going to have to go with it and then face the punishment, later. I'm wondering if the soul has more knowledge than we know, is my ultimate question.
I think
And I can't hear him,
Well, are
Braxton.
you
So
asking something like, Richard, maybe I can frame this. Are you saying something like, okay, my soul, like let's say Christianity's true, and my soul becomes like I'm regenerated by God. Okay, I'm saved, as we would say in the Baptist world. But then at some point, and the Baptists wouldn't go along with this, they'd say it was evidence that I never was saved to begin with. But let's say I become a Muslim. You're basically saying, okay, did I reason that out with my intellect and become a Muslim for that reason? But my soul deep down is still very much saved and knows that it's saved. Is that kind of what you're asking?
well, it would be okay with me if I still have to face punishment, but I'm wondering if there's a separation between like my soul communicating with the Holy Spirit and it knows the truth, but I've outmuscled it somehow with my sinful nature, and I genuinely think Islam is true, and I go all the way to my grave that way. Is my soul have knowledge that I'm not aware of?
okay, I think I understand. I think there's
a couple. I can't hear him, so I'll have to listen on YouTube.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right.
I can answer
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you,
brother.
Fallen. Well, is he a brother? Yeah. Well,
Brotherhood of man, fatherhood of God.
Brotherhood. Gotcha. Fatherhood of God. Yes. Very good. Very good. Okay. Is he still on? Is he listening?
I think he's still listening.
There. Okay. Yeah, I think I kind of understand the question. There's a couple ways to come at this. I think certainly we can say that souls can be malformed. Souls can, if we hold to a kind of view of evil that's kind of an ancient medieval view of privation, we think that's coherent. I'm not arguing for it. I'm just saying I think we can experience in the soul kind of privations within the soul, certainly that bear themselves out in a functionally or malfunctional practice or life that bear out kind of consequences. Now, if I think maybe what he's getting at or suggesting is something like, if my soul has knowledge that I don't have, then maybe there's a bifurcation between two persons or something like that. There's like there's the person that chooses and the person that knows better than the chooser. And I think it's true to say, like in Christian tradition, many would say, going back to the Augustinian tradition, Descartes would say something like this, that God himself is somehow impressed upon the soul. And so in some sort of basic way, if we're being honest about who we are and what it is that we're related to, that our natures as ensouled beings fundamentally have some kind of recourse to God. They're a pointer to God, and there's kind of souls themselves become sources of information. And so certainly we could deny the imago Dei internally that is impressed upon the soul. We could reject it and turn away from it. And we could experience, again, a kind of privation or a malfunctioning soul, where the structure is not fully integrated because of the malfunction in that structure. We could reject the knowledge that has been given to us by God. Yeah, certainly.
All right. Hey, we have someone here who I think said earlier they can't think of much that you disagree with them about, and that is David Pallmann, or as he is known sometimes online, because James White dubbed him kind of the Dillard's apologist.
Yes, that's great. The Dillard's apologist.
Joshua, do you know who David Pallmann is?
I know him through social media. Funny thing, and we've talked several times. Yeah, I know him. I haven't met him in person, but he lives in my hometown, actually, where I grew up.
Is that right? Where's that?
Yes. It's near St. Louis, Missouri, in southern Illinois.
Oh, that's how someone like David could visit Evansville, Indiana, but yet not tell us that he was visiting. But that's okay, because he helped me out today by letting the philosophy bros know that we were doing this. So, David, welcome to the show, and give us the best Dillard's has to offer.
Thanks for having me on. Real quick mic check, because I know we were having some issues before. Are you all able to hear me all right? Okay, yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, Joshua, I come here. Oh, you can't hear me.
Can you not hear
Joshua?
him?
Unable to hear me?
I cannot hear him. Can you hear him?
Yes, I can. Joshua, this is going to be an odd request. Refresh your browser and come right back in, and I think it'll fix it for you. There he goes. So here we are.
Well, I told Will Hess to tell you and Pritchett that I was coming out there earlier this week. So yeah, really? So if I have the text messages to prove it. So if he didn't tell you, it's on him.
I understand. Well, I appreciate that. That's you get an official administrative forgiven there or something. But yeah, well, it is good to hear from you. And here we go. Joshua's back.
Here we are.
Can you hear him now, Joshua?
I can hear something in the background.
Testing.
I can hear him now. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, Joshua, good to be on with you, because I am here very much as a fan of you and your work. I cited it in my 9-hour series, Defending the Existence of the Soul. I've cited some of your work in that, so I do like that. Also, points for drinking out of a Trump mug, and for citing Richard Farmerton, who I think is the second greatest philosopher of the current era. So even more points.
Now, just to be careful, just to be clear, this is Trump 2016, which was a different person than today.
Okay,
that's clear. Whatever you think of the Trump today, or whatever you thought of the Trump in 2016.
You have plausible deniability.
Made they're two different people.
That I see what you did there. Okay.
Well, does that mean there can be a third term?
Yes. Well, yeah.
It depends on if his soul, remains constant over time. But Joshua, I wanted to, or should I call you Dr. Farris? I'm sorry if calling you Joshua is too casual.
No, call me Joshua's fine. Yeah. Or call me Father. Or call me Father. How about that?
Oh, but the Bible tells me to call no man Father. So sorry, I can't do that.
There's that. Oh, you are a Baptist, aren't you? Yeah.
I am a Free Will Baptist. Yeah, sorry. But I wanted to bounce an argument for dualism off of you, because it's kind of my version of the argument from introspection, but everyone tells me there's a problem with it because you're not supposed to reach ontological conclusions from epistemic facts. So basically the way I formulate it is premise one is, for any physical state of affairs, knowledge of it is fallible. Premise two, but knowledge of at least some of my own mental states is infallible. And so conclusion is, therefore, at least some of my own mental states are not physical states. What do you make of that argument?
Some of my knowledge is infallible, and therefore some of my knowledge is therefore not physical or not physical states.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah. So pretty close. Yeah, knowledge of any physical state of affairs is fallible, but knowledge of at least some of my own mental states is infallible. So therefore, some of my own mental states can't be physical states.
Well, that's valid, right? Yeah, I think it's valid. Is it sound? Yeah, I think. I mean, even like a substance dualist might challenge. I mean, Descartes was probably he was an infallibilist, I think. Yeah, they might challenge the infallibility claim, but I mean, maybe we don't have infallible knowledge, but I mean, certainly when I mean, even looking at kind of Fumerton's kind of phenomenal dualism, it seems to me that we do have something infallible, but I think that kind of moves us in a more rationalist direction, right? I mean, can we have infallible empirical knowledge, or can we have infallible phenomenal knowledge? I don't know. So I guess the second premise, that would be what would be kind of difficult. But I tend to think, now I haven't said this in print anywhere, but I tend to think that based upon what it is that we begin with, that we do have infallible knowledge. We do have infallible knowledge of our own epistemic states. And if we have infallible knowledge, that seems to entail some kind of ontological, right? That seems to be right. That's highly controversial today, but right. I tend to go that direction. This is where your strong kind of classical foundationalism is showing up. Most people don't press me into that corner. But if I was pressed in that corner, I tend toward classical foundationalism of some sort, and I tend to affirm infallibility of certain kinds of certain items of knowledge. I think are infallible. I have to, when I practice the kind of thought experiment of meditating upon, the possibility that I could be deceived by a demon, it seems to reduce to some sort of foundational item of knowledge that is infallible, that I must know. I have to know it, and it's true, right?
Yeah, and I think to be clear, the argument doesn't actually require that you be a classical foundationalist. It works as long as you think that there's at least one of your mental states that you can know with certainty. So I like Fumerton's example, right, of the headache, because it's kind of just a easy one for people to grasp. But as long as you think that there's any mental state with certainty, and the first premise holds, then the conclusion follows. So even though one of my defenses of the second premise will kind of go with my general regress argument for classical foundationalism, if you think that there's anything you can know with certainty about your own mental states. But yeah, it sounds like you do think it's at least possibly a sound argument.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is, in the first premise, if you take that as true, then it presupposes some sort of it must presuppose some sort of infallible knowledge, right? Is that implicit
in the first premise? Because the first premise is just saying knowledge of any physical state of affairs is fallible. You could be a thoroughgoing fallibilist, right? And so then you'd reject the second premise. So I don't think that the first premise presupposes infallibilism.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's potentially sound.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to have a philosopher's stamp of approval on that argument.
Not surprised, David. Thanks so much for being here.
That's good.
And we'll let you go now, but glad you could be on, David. Thanks. All right. And we have one more person here that I want to bring up, and we'll just let this be the last caller, if that's okay. We want to be sensitive to Dr. Farris's time. And so I'm going to bring in Jake.
Oh, I was prepared for 2 hours. Okay.
Hey, I'm happy to keep going if people keep calling in. Right now, Jake, you're the only one backstage except for the Dillard's apologist who can't find his way out, but he doesn't have to. And so, Jake, welcome to the show.
What's up?
Yeah. So, what's your question for Dr. Farris?
So you believe in an immaterial, immortal, eternal soul, right?
I do believe in an immaterial soul, and I think probably that it entails, it entails some kind of immortality. Probably, yeah. I would say I would say I affirm an immortal soul. I think it's, I mean, it might take me a little bit to get there, but yeah, I
Wait, so
affirm
I
an
can't
immortal.
hear you. I don't know what's going on.
Can you hear me, Braxton?
I can hear you. If you can't, are you not able to hear him, Jake?
Yeah, I can't hear him.
Sometimes when we put a new caller in, something messes up. If you would just refresh your screen and come back in, I'll put you right back up, and I think you'll be able to hear him.
All right.
Well, that hopefully. Hey, you've been doing great here, Joshua. This is. I think we had some good calls here.
Yes.
Mostly atheists, a couple of Christians.
Yes, this has been fun.
Yeah. And while we're waiting on him, what book of yours would you recommend for someone that wanted to get started learning about the soul in your from your capacity? And I'll ask Jake. Jake, when he starts speaking, tell me if you can hear him. Go ahead and start speaking, Joshua.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. I had just asked Jake, before we go back to you, I just asked Joshua to tell me which book of his people should pick up, and then we'll go right to you. Joshua?
Yeah. So a more theological book would be An Introduction to Theological Anthropology, Humans Both Creaturely and Divine, with Baker. If you want more of a philosophical book, Defending the Soul, then I would say The Creation of Self, A Case for the Soul. You can see it right up here. Right up there.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Thanks, Joshua. All right, Jake, fire away.
So I'm a Christian, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Yeah. I'm just
So let me just catch you
physicalist.
up, Jake. Joshua just said a moment ago that yes, he believes in an immaterial soul. He quibbled a little bit about whether he wanted to be, express certainty about whether it's immortal, but he came down on, I think I affirm an immortal, immaterial soul. And so that would be where we're ready for you to pick up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you take passages in scripture that say the soul who sins shall die, or for example, both God will destroy both soul and body in hell?
Yeah, Ezekiel 18:4, I think, says something like the soul who sins shall die.
Dang, I can't hear you again.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Check, check.
Nah.
Okay, well, I can translate here. He's basically asking,
and I can't hear Braxton now.
Do what? Can you hear me?
We can't hear you. Can you hear him?
You can't hear me either, Joshua?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Everybody's gone. I'm all by myself now.
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Nope.
Okay.
Check, check, check.
Refresh.
Refresh. I'll refresh.
Yeah. All right, Jake, can you hear me?
No, I feel like it's whenever someone leaves or something.
Yeah, there's something StreamYard's got to work out.
Now I can't hear you because he left or something. So we gotta all stay in the panel or something.
I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. Joshua, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, not the host now. Right.
Good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just jump right in. Ezekiel 18:4, I think it is, the soul who sins shall die. You have passages in the Gospels where are suggestive that the soul can be destroyed. Yeah, so these are common kind of arguments, especially from those who tend to be materialists, who are affirming kind of the Christian mortalist tradition, or some would call it today kind of the conditionalist or annihilationist position. These are really good, interesting questions about how to interpret these passages. I think a couple things I would say is that I think anytime you read the narrative of Scripture, particularly as we understand life and death early on in Genesis, and how life and death are being framed in the very beginning with the creation covenant. If you assume creation has a covenant, God enters into a covenant with Adam and Eve. I think in that context, he gives us some context for understanding both life and death. All of God's actions within his covenantal storyline is directed at providing life and blessing that life through his covenantal heads, Adam, and through the patriarchs who are representatives of the covenant. He intends to give them life and bless that life. But the consequences, of course, of disobeying covenantal obligations are, of course, curses and death. And so we see a curse and death in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve sin and eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when they do so, the text says they die that day. Now, they don't die, at least immediately, in the intuitive way or at least the way that we customarily think of death. They don't die in terms of brain death or bodily death, where their body goes into the grave or the ground. So I think when the scriptures describe death, it's important that we understand, I think, that death takes on different conceptual layers of meaning in the narrative, in the covenantal storyline. I think death means something more than bodily death, although bodily death is an important part of the scriptural story. It's certainly an important
No, I
stage
agree. Yeah.
existence.
Um,
And so we have to understand it in that layered way. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say because now we're just transitioning kind of to like more of death, but because I also hold that death has like multiple meanings depending on like the context, right? Like bodily death or like being separated from God, annihilated, alienated from God, that kind of thing. I'm fine with that, but that doesn't. I don't see how you can get an immaterial. You don't need an immaterial soul for that view. Like I could hold both those views of death and not have an immaterial, immortal soul.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think you could. So I don't think I would at least directly infer a soul from that understanding of death in context of the scriptural storyline. I would go to different lines of arguments within scripture to make a positive case for the soul or an immaterial substance. So I would say that view of death or this kind of conceptual layering of different meanings of death in scripture that are related can be understood as a dualist or maybe as a materialist in some ways. So I think in that way,
Hmm.
we could come at the passages on death, and we could be a materialist or a dualist and make good sense out of those passages. I think that's true.
What passages? Yeah, what passages do you think a physicalist or a materialist would struggle with, or what are your like strongest texts? Because I don't see any texts that support dualism at all.
Okay. Well, so I would say that there are
Or you can go
several
into
passages.
like the philosophical problem or whatever if you want to do that. I don't really mind.
Yeah, I think there's good philosophical arguments for a soul or for dualism, maybe, or maybe not even dualism. It could just be referring to an immaterial thing that exists. But I would point the reader to 2 Corinthians 5. I think traditionally that passage has been appropriated by many interpreters throughout Scripture as entailing a disembodied intermediate state. So I think this is
Okay.
really kind of the important line to take when we want to look at the scriptural passages and infer some kind of disembodied state. But I would say also you could look at Ezekiel 37. I think the way that Ezekiel uses nephesh, Richard Steiner highlights this. He's an Old Testament scholar, an important one. He highlights that in that context, the worldview of the ancient Near East worldview of the day, it was very common to read these souls as being, now he's talking about it in the context of a kind of redemptive context
You
where
mean
divine
when
action
it says like
present.
the bones shall rise or something?
That's right.
Is
Yeah.
that
So the
the
valley
verse?
of dry bones.
What?
And
Okay.
yeah. And so if we're going to make sense of the doctrine of physical resurrection, you might make an argument that in order to coherently make sense of the doctrine of resurrection, bodily resurrection, we have to have something like a soul that continues or persists from bodily death to
Yeah,
post-resurrection
I don't think
life.
that's necessary at all.
Well, otherwise we have, this is a
Yeah,
philosophical
what's
problem.
why?
We have a replacement. We don't have an actual thing that persists, because that thing in a real sense goes out of existence and has to be brought back to life in a true sense, or brought back into existence via or as resurrected body. So you do have some literature, New Testament literature, that's arguing that a physical resurrection should be understood as effectively recreation, a recreation view, where God effectively
Yeah,
replaces
I would
the
describe
old
it.
body
Okay.
with a new body. And I would say if you're holding to
Hmm.
a replacement view, then it is very similar to a clone. Like maybe we could make clones in the world. If we have a
Hmm.
sophisticated science, then we could make a perfect clone or a perfect
Yeah.
duplicate of somebody
You guys
else.
still can't
But
hear
that
me,
wouldn't be
right?
that person, it would be somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I wouldn't describe it that way. It talks about how God will call us back to life, right? We'll hear His voice, so it'll be the same person who comes out just because it's like a glorified body, or like it's just a restoration, it's just a continuance unto life. So I don't see, like, even the clone argument. It doesn't. I wouldn't see that as like a good argument, because God knows the individual, like in a relational way. So it wouldn't, even if it was like a so-called clone, it wouldn't be identical to the true person, because God calls that
Can
person
you
by
guys
name.
hear me?
He knows them. He
Yes,
remembers them. So
we can.
like it's just not like, I wouldn't see it as like a valid argument,
Well,
Jake, can you hear me now?
because I see it as
yeah,
like
we can
limiting
hear you.
God in a way.
We
I
can
know
hear
you
you.
can hear me, Ryan. Jake, can you hear me?
I can't hear
Okay.
him. Maybe if I come back, because he left the panel earlier. So I think
Well,
that's what
yeah.
happened.
Okay. I just want
Does he want me
well,
to come back?
yeah, I can't hear Jake. Jake, I'm going to pull you out. Jake, if you're hearing this on YouTube, I can't, you can't hear me, but I can hear you.
No,
And
I
so
can't hear you.
I'm not trying to kick you. I just don't, I just don't have a way for you to hear me. So, oh, and now Joshua Ryan Farris is gone. Well, this has been, this is starting to be real problematic. Somebody write an angry email at StreamYard. Can you hear me, Joshua?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Let me just say a couple of things about what was just said, because I'm sorry that Jake can't push further on that. I think we got the idea. I'm sorry that you didn't get to say more. I'll pull him right back in one more time and see if we can all hear each other. Jake, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear Joshua Ryan Farris? Joshua, speak.
Check. Yes.
Yep. It's all good.
We can all hear each other. Okay. So, yeah, well, let me just cap off a bit of what was just said, because my thinking on this is very much similar. It's the continuity of identity problem, because if there
Mm.
is something that is you, that you're, let's just think of, I like to use this terminology, the conscious experiencer that I'm identified with, the conscious experiencer that is perceiving the experience in front of me right now and around me. That conscious experiencer, if you're saying that God can create, um, basically it would be a copy, recreate you in that sense, and
Yes.
then he could do that right now, and then I'd be looking over at the other me, being like, well, he's not the conscious experiencer that is this one. I'm the conscious experiencer that is this
Right.
one.
That's what.
And
Yeah. I
That's
and
see.
if it is
exactly
the
I
right.
case, and
wouldn't
I'll kick
say
it right
that.
back to you,
Yeah.
Jake. If it is the case that God can take that conscious experiencer that is me and put it into the new creation, well, that sounds like the soul to me.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't say consciousness is necessary for a person to be who they are. Like I don't. That's not necessary. It's just like when you sleep, you're not conscious. Like in my view, you're not conscious, right? Because I don't believe we have a soul. So that would just mean that what makes us us is the fact that we're for a living person, the fact that we have breath in us, right? But when we're dead, that's God still sustains us, right? In the sense that uh, I go to Luke 22 for this one, or is it Luke 20 when he says, "I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." They live to Him, and he's talking about the resurrection of the dead. So in the sense that like God knows the future, He promises them resurrection, um, and so in that sense, God could look up to them in His promises and sustain them through their faith, etc. And it's just His covenant love that restores them in the end.
Well, before I kick it back to Joshua, because this is more about him answering questions. So are you saying, just to make sure I understand you, that you're okay with the notion that in the new heavens and new earth, that experiencer, that recreation of you might not conscious, like the you that is experiencing this call right now might not experience that for all practical purposes from your perspective. It could be another person that's kind of a copy of you. Is that right?
No, it's not possible. It's the same me.
So if it's the same you, then the thing that transversed this space between the death of your physical body and the decomposition of it and
Hmm.
God's recreation of you, the thing that goes between those, that is a continuity of your
Yeah.
identity.
Hmm.
I just call that the soul, but I'll kick it over to Joshua if you know.
Yeah, I think that's right. I agree with that. I mean, even if we throw out psychological continuity, maybe some would get kind of hung up on psychological continuity. I think there is still some kind of continuity that is necessary to make coherent sense out of the transition from bodily death to post-resurrection life. There is some sort of continuity issue that is at stake. And even if we punt to, well, God kind of sees you in this light or something like that. He sees you, and so in his seeing of you,
Or He just like sustains your knowledge or in your memories and all that. Like He just keeps it, and then He like gives it back to you when He raises you back.
right. So I think the yeah, there would be a more fundamental question about what is it that what is it that he's actually sustaining. Are you then just a kind of computer program that he sustains in his mind, that he then kind of downloads
My
to
life, I
the
would
next
say,
body?
sustaining my life.
If he's sustaining your life, he's sustaining something about you that makes you you, and I think that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just a soul,
And yeah, I would just say that would
not a
be.
body. Because intuitively, the
Hmm.
body is in the grave, the body is dead. So there
Hmm.
is something different about this. Is one thing, this is an important, I think, argument that needs to be highlighted for materialists. When the body goes into the grave, it literally has no signs, exhibits no signs of brain activity that could even correlate with consciousness. The body itself even decomposes. So there is a common sense, intuitive experience that the body itself, that was my body, that I intuitively experience as was my body, it becomes something that is still my body, but it's not me. It's not me that's in the ground. It was It's my body that's in the ground, but it's a body that is has even the potential to not exist. So whatever God is sustaining, it's not me because the body's in the ground. If He's sustaining me as an embodied thing, he's sustaining something else. He's sustaining something else that is necessary to make sense of the body that he's resurrecting.
Yeah, I guess it would just be like my history, just who I am as like my memories, my knowledge, my faith, like just all these things. Just because He's all powerful, He could do this, right? He could just remember everything perfectly, and so He just gives it all back when He raises
Yeah.
people from the dead. I mean, I don't
Can
really
I
see that as an issue, to be honest.
can
I
I
think
ask you a
yeah.
hypothetical? Not to interrupt Joshua. The
Go
hypothetical
ahead.
is,
Yeah.
it sounds a bit like what you're saying. Tell me what I'm wrong about this, and I don't mean to make this sound less pious than what it is, but like is thought sometimes like if we could take a copy with MRI technology or something, the human brain down to the smallest detail in a way that it would copy all of my knowledge, memories, all those kind of things perfectly, and then I were to put that onto an artificial neural net or something that's powerful enough to hold it. It sounds like you're saying something kind of like that is happening, except with a recreated human body. He's taking all that information, all that history, all that knowledge, all the snapshots, all the memories, and putting them in this new creation. And for your money, that amounts to, okay, so now I'm experiencing that. And what I'm wanting to say is that information, could God create two of you then using
No,
that information?
I would
And then if
say
he did
no.
create two of you, which one would be the consciousness that you're experiencing now, the experiencer that we're
hmm
talking to now?
I would just say no. He wouldn't do that. I mean, that would
But
just mean he's
could he
not.
do that?
No,
He could not create two of you using that information.
no. Wow,
Is that
he
because there's
can't.
something that is uniquely you that he's going to
Yes,
plant into the one he
he
recreated?
knows he has a covenant relationship with me, so he can't have he never says in scripture he's gonna make two people that who are me, and he loves both of them. He never says that it's the
Right, right.
same person.
It's a hypothetical to get
Yeah,
to the
that's why I
point.
said he would not do that because he's faithful. He would
Right,
not do
and
that.
I understand that, but it's a hypothetical meant to get at the question of, I don't think, here's what I'm
I
saying.
mean,
I don't think
I
it's
would say
just
it's impossible for him to do that because he can't lie. I mean,
okay,
he
If
can't
but
it's
do
I'm
that.
but I'm saying
it's
it's more than just the information. You're talking as though the information gets transplanted into this new recreated body, and then I'm there. And I'm trying to say, no, there's something else besides the information that is your first person experience that is
Not
unique to
no.
this.
I would just say God has the authority. Like if he has the authority to like just create me, the same me, through my knowledge and memory and just my faith this in Christ, and just say this is you. He has the authority to just call me into existence and just say that this is the same you. Like he has that authority. That's my answer. Like
I'm not questioning his authority so much as I am the
yeah,
metaphysical possibility of it.
yeah. The
yeah. I'm
metaphysical
just
possibility is important to make sense of coherent sense out of the resurrection. If your view is right, then I think it undermines the hope of the resurrection that we do have. I think
really
the important point that Gregory makes in On the Soul and Resurrection, that most of the church has affirmed throughout history. I mean, some philosophers call it the principle of non-repeatability. If something literally goes out of existence, it can't be brought back into existence again. If that thing that doesn't go out of existence is still in existence, then, well, it's not the body that's in the grave, it's something else, because the body is not the conscious thinking thing that has a sort of a substance or a thing that makes me me or makes you you. There's something more fundamental about what makes me me and what makes you you,
okay.
that God is
Mm.
sustaining. If that's the case, if he is sustaining something, he's sustaining something that is then resurrected, physically resurrected.
I would just say
But
it's two perspectives at that point. Like at John 11, it says, though it gives the two perspectives, right? Though they die, yet shall they live, right? So I interpret that like is physical death, but they shall live. So like future tense there. And then the next verse says, um, though everyone who lives and believes shall never die. So it's like giving two different perspectives. They're gonna die in one sense, but in the human sense, like in the worldly sense, they're dead, right? But then in God's perspective, His divine perspective, they're actually alive in Christ in the sense that they will be brought back to life. Death is not the end for them.
I'll tell
well,
you
then
what,
the
Jake,
question
we've
is
had you
still
on for a
alive.
little while. I'm going to
Hmm.
Yeah.
let you go after
All right, man.
Joshua makes this comment, but
For sure.
thanks so much for coming on. And I really appreciate having some pushback. This is one of my favorite topics. So I'm sorry I jumped in so much, but thanks for being here. I'll let Joshua kind of roll this
All
out.
right, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that I think what Jake was saying was that God is actually sustaining something in existence in order to be physically resurrected. I agree that there are different conceptions of death and even life to some extent that are described in Scripture. There's life as existence, and then there's kind of this redemptive life, this Zoe life, and in the New Testament that's described as something that occurs in the context of redemption, where we become transformed beings themselves. So there is a complexity of different views or nuances on what we mean by death. But it's important, I think what Jake was saying was that, there's different perspectives, okay? Fair enough. There's a bodily death that occurs, and that bodily death, simply speaking, that body was my body, but it's not me. It's the body is not what makes me me. If I'm to persist and be physically resurrected again, then there must be something about me that makes me me, that is not my body, that makes coherent the fact that I could be physically resurrected again. So it seems to me that whatever it is that God is doing, whatever it is that he's sustaining, sustaining something about me that makes me me. And so we would say this is something like an immaterial substance or a soul or something like that, that is just other than my body. I think we would have to wrestle with this question of, if I could literally, I don't think he was saying this, but if I could literally go out of existence, then I would have to be recreated again. So many philosophers would say, yeah, I mean, something that literally goes out of existence, can it be made again? In other words, a new creation, like when God created the world, does he recreate in the same sense, or in the literal sense, does he create that thing again? And if we are to say that he does, that is literally what's happening, well, we have to wrestle with, is that even conceivable? There are some things that are logically inconceivable because, well, they're logically incoherent. And I think that not all philosophers take this view, but I think I think many do take this view, based upon the principle of non-repeatability, that when something dies and goes out of existence, it literally can't come into existence again. If it does come into existence, whatever it is, it's the closest continuer. It's a replacement of the old with something new, even if it looks exactly like the old thing. Or maybe it could even have all the same memory states, character states, the same personal journey and narrative in its head, but it wouldn't be the same thing if it literally went out of existence.
I think, Joshua, this is one of those points that, and I'm sure Jake wasn't making this mistake, and I know that my smart, academically minded friends who are physicalists don't make this mistake. I've talked to them about it. But I do think a lot of people, when they come to this topic, whether it's in fiction, like in movies, or whether it's with respect to the resurrection and your ongoing existence, I don't think people appreciate properly what exactly there's a distinction is and what that distinction is. So like when you have, I think that people just think, Ray Kurzweil, made the Kurzweil piano, or at least his name's on it. He created a lot of the voice recognition technology, and he correctly predicted a lot of the technological advancements of the last 20 or 30 years, like to 90 something % accuracy. In the late 90s, he said we'd have wearable computer technology like by 2010, and he was right. And so he's really good at that, but he believes that he's one of these transhumanists that thinks we can survive physical death and gain immortality by uploading the information of our brains into a computer, and then we'd be in the computer. And my thought to that is always, but you could conceivably do that right now, but you would still be standing here thinking over here, and that's in the computer would not be your perspective. So that's something else. It's like a copy. And that's what I see happening here with the continuity of identity, or the lack thereof, on a physicalism. And then I think the same people are making the same mistakes. They're thinking, well, if everything in my head is back in my head, well, then I'm there. Well, hold on, there's something else, and that is your first person experience.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. There's a first person experience, and that first person experience is there's something about that makes you that cannot be reduplicated. It's impossible to reduplicate that. If you could reduplicate that in the ways that these materialists are describing, then you would have two yous that have first person perspective, but that would be logically impossible. Right. That creates a whole like logic. Yeah, that's a logical impossibility. Now we can create some, maybe theoretically or hypothetically, we could create somebody that's just like you, right? That has all the physical attributes. If we know enough about your biology, in theory, I mean, this is another side that's related to this intuition. If you are a physical body and we knew enough about your biology and your neurobiology, we could, in theory, maybe even reduplicate you in a lab. But that would be impossible. It would just be a copy of you, right? It wouldn't be you.
Mm-hmm.
It might be your clone, your twin, even a perfect twin, maybe. It might be a perfect twin, but it still wouldn't be you.
And so it might claim to be you, Joshua.
That's right.
Yes. And be very convincing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There could be maybe an AI that somehow is downloaded or into an organic biological system, and it could claim to be me, right? And have all the same kind of physical characteristics, maybe sound exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Have all the maybe all of the memories are downloaded, so downloaded or uploaded, whatever, right? But it still wouldn't be me. There would be something fundamental about me that would be, or about it that would be distinct from me. It wouldn't share my first person perspective, and I wouldn't share, if it had a first person perspective, I wouldn't share its first person perspective. Those would be two distinct things altogether. So this is the problem with the materialist view of resurrection, I think. And I agree with you. I think it's, I just find it pressing. It comes close to incoherence, and it certainly undermines the possibility of hope, the hope that we are to have, that we will be resurrected in the future. If there is this rational component or this rational coherence feature to the doctrine of resurrection, which I think there is, then the materialist view seems to crumble at this point. If materialism is true, I'm not confident that we will be resurrected. Not at all. I mean, I don't think we have justification for believing that to be the case.
Well, and one of the things I was about 4 or 5 years ago, I went on a deep dive to try and find out how people answered in the literature the continuity of identity, people that were Christian physicalists. And I was frankly surprised how strange some of the explanations were for getting around or resolving this problem, like almost like a teleportation. On your death, a particle transfers to another place in heaven or something like that, and you get the continuity of it. There's very strange ways, and when you're reading that of course I say some strange things probably to defend some of my points that I think are true, but when you're reading that, and it's just it's almost works against the position, because I'm seeing what they're having to do to try and resolve this problem, and it just makes it more implausible to me.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They have to come up with they have to do a lot of conceptual gymnastics to make it, to motivate a kind of coherent case. Yeah, I think it, I just don't think they can. They've tried, but I don't think they can. And this is certainly the strength of the dualist position. Even if you're not already like, you don't believe in a kind of intermediate state, or at least a robust view of the disembodied intermediate state, you still have to say something about the coherence of the physical resurrection. You have to make sense of it somehow. And the dualist makes good sense of it, makes good sense. It's a better view overall to make sense of what it is that we proclaim as Christians is the hope for the believer. The hope of the believers that we'll be resurrected again. And I think dualism makes coherent sense out of that. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Joshua. This has been a lot of fun. I want to encourage people to check out in the description, take the link and go learn more about Dr. Farris. And I think for a lot of you who hang out in this space, just notice someone like the Dillard's apologist, David Pallmann, really admires and gets a lot out of Dr. Farris. So maybe that's a strong endorsement for those of you that appreciate David Pallmann's ministry. I really appreciate all of you all showing up for this. If you are in those philosophy bro type communities and groups on Facebook and Twitter, go share this. I think this is a fun video. We got some atheists, we got some Christians, got good discussion. And so, Joshua, anything you want to say or push before we end the broadcast?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I think correlation doesn't equal identity. Description itself doesn't equal explanation. We need to keep that in mind. Functional integrity doesn't equal experience. Experience is different from structure. It's different from functionality. It's different from brain functionality. Causes are not the same things as reasons, and we act as human beings, persons, we act for reasons. System itself is not the same thing as the subject or subjectivity. We need subjectivity. It's what makes the world interesting. Without a subject of consciousness or a soul, basically the materialist view, I think we lose what is most important, what's most interesting, what's most valuable in life. When I encounter my wife, there's lots of things about her body that I appreciate, right? But at the end of the day, also, there's something more about her that makes her her, even that's intangible, that's mysterious, that is something about even her personality, her memory, her narrative. But even more fundamental than that, something about her that makes her her that I appreciate. That the body itself and the parts of the body don't even touch when it comes to the person. They just don't even come close to adequately explaining the subject or the person itself. So I think if you deny the soul doctrine, which the church has affirmed throughout most of her history, you don't just lose doctrine, you lose the subject that knows, that reasons, that experiences, that encounters God. And so at this point, you haven't explained the human person, you've actually explained them away.
Well, all right, Joshua. And for those of you physicalists out there, you should know that I was just talking, Joshua. I don't know if this will end up happening about the possibility of having a discussion at some point in the future with he and someone like Chris Tate to talk this through. And I think that would be a fascinating discussion. But Joshua, thanks so much for being on Trinity Radio today. I'm glad to say you're a friend. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.